Eddie Guerrero. Name 10 wrestlers he feared, except no, he didn't. That list never existed. Not in his autobiography, not in his shoot interviews, not in any credible source from before his death in 2005. What you're about to hear is the truth behind one of wrestling YouTube's most persistent lies. A fabrication built on algorithms, not facts. A clickbait phantom that disrespects the memory of one of the greatest to ever step in the ring. Eddie Guerrero didn't fear wrestlers. He fought them. He bled with them. He loved them. And sometimes he hated them. But fear, that word doesn't belong in his story. Fear implies retreat. Fear implies hiding. Fear implies a man who backed down when challenged. Eddie Guerrero never backed down. Not once, not ever. This is the real history of Eddie's relationships with the men YouTube keeps putting on fake lists. The conflicts were real. The friction was real. The blood was real. But the fear? That's fiction. That's something content creators invented because it gets more clicks than the truth. The wrestling industry is built on stories. Some of those stories happen in the ring under the lights. Others happen backstage in locker rooms and hotel bars. Eddie's story includes both. He had enemies. He had rivals. He had people who wanted to see him fail. But he also had brothers, mentors, friends who would die for him, and he for them. What he never had was a list of people he was afraid to face. That concept is so foreign to who Eddie was that it's almost offensive. This script will take you through the real relationships, the truth behind the clickbait, and it starts with the man who tried to bury him before he ever got his shot. Number 10, Kevin Nash, the ideological enemy. Eddie Guerrero didn't fear Kevin Nash. He despised him. There's a difference. Fear makes you hide. Hatred makes you fight back. And Eddie fought back hard. In the late 1990s, Nash was one of the most powerful men in World Championship Wrestling. He wasn't just a wrestler. He was a booker, a creative force, a political operator who controlled who got pushed and who got buried. And Nash had a very specific vision of what a main event star should look like. Big, tall, intimidating, preferably over 6 feet tall with muscles on muscles. The kind of guy who could sell action figures to kids and look believable, beating up 5 guys at once. Eddie Guerrero stood 5'8" on a good day. Chris Benoit was 5'10". Dean Malenko was 5'9". To Nash, they were worthless. He called them vanilla midgets. The term was designed to hurt in 2 specific ways. Midget attacked their size. It reduced them to circus performers, sideshow attractions who belonged on the undercard at best. Vanilla attacked their charisma. It said they were boring, flavorless, interchangeable technicians who could work a good match but couldn't connect with an audience, couldn't cut a promo, couldn't draw money. It said they had no star quality, no main event potential, no future. Nash didn't just say this privately. He spread this philosophy through WCW's locker room like a virus. He said it in interviews. He said it to their faces. He made sure everyone knew that in his vision of professional wrestling, there was no room for small men. It didn't matter that Eddie had captivated audiences in Mexico with Creo Ballet. It didn't matter that he had put on technical masterpieces in Japan with New Japan Pro Wrestling. It didn't matter that he could work a 5-star match in his sleep and make any opponent look like $1 million. Nash's opinion carried weight, and his opinion was that Eddie Guerrero would never be a star in America. This wasn't about physical intimidation. Nash wasn't going to beat Eddie up in the parking lot. This was about economics, about politics, about the power to make or break careers. If the head booker thinks you're a mid-carder, that's what you become. Your push stops. Your pay stops growing. Your spot on the card gets locked in place. You work the 3rd match from the bottom forever. You never get the title shot. You never main event pay-per-views. You never make real money. Eddie saw Nash as a political enemy who was actively suppressing his livelihood to protect the old guard, to protect the big men who had made millions in the 1980s and didn't want to share the spotlight with a new generation. So Eddie rebelled. In 1998, he formed the Latino World Order, the LWO. It was a direct parody of Nash's New World Order. The NWO had been the dominant faction in WCW for years. They wore black and white. They spray-painted their logo everywhere. They acted like they owned the company. Eddie's LWO wore similar colors and acted with similar arrogance. The message was clear. If you can do it, so can we. If you can form a gang and take over, we can too. WCW management killed the angle before it could really take off. They forced Eddie to disband the group. They didn't want any challenges to the established order, but the message was sent. Eddie Guerrero was not going to bow down. He was not going to accept his place at the bottom of the card quietly. He mocked the power structure to its face. Behind the scenes, Eddie and his friends held court. They talked about how they were being treated. They complained openly. They strategized about what to do next. In Eddie's autobiography, Cheating, Death, Stealing Life, he describes Nash as evil in this context. Not scary, not intimidating, evil. That's a moral judgment. That's the language of someone who sees an injustice and refuses to stay silent about it. Evil implies malicious intent. It implies someone who knows they're hurting people and doesn't care. That's how Eddie saw Nash, as someone who was deliberately holding talented wrestlers down to protect his own position. The ultimate act of defiance came in January 2000. Eddie Guerrero, Chris Benoit, Dean Malenko, and Perry Saturn all requested their release from WCW at the same time. They coordinated it. They planned it. They walked away from guaranteed contracts that would have paid them for years. They walked away from the security of a major company. They bet on themselves. They left for the World Wrestling Federation, where they became the Radicals. They debuted together. They fought together. They showed WCW and Kevin Nash that they didn't need the old guard's approval to be stars. That's not the behavior of a frightened man. That's the behavior of someone who would rather risk everything than live under someone else's boot. A scared person stays where it's safe, takes the guaranteed money, keeps their head down. Eddie did the opposite. He burned bridges. He took risks. He put his career on the line to prove Kevin Nash wrong, and he succeeded. In WWE, Eddie became WWE champion. He main evented pay-per-views. He became one of the most beloved performers in company history. Everything Nash said he couldn't do, he did. Years later, after WCW collapsed and after Eddie died in November 2005, Nash tried to rewrite the history of their conflict. He went on podcasts and shoot interviews and claimed the vanilla midget comments were meant to motivate guys, to work them into proving him wrong. He called it reverse psychology. He expressed admiration for Eddie's talent in hindsight. He said nice things at Eddie's funeral and in tributes afterward. But Eddie died without ever reconciling that relationship. The damage Nash inflicted during those critical years in WCW stayed with him until the end. Eddie never forgave him, never forgot what he said, never forgot how it felt to be called worthless by someone with the power to make it true. This was never about fear. It was about a man fighting for his dignity in an industry designed to crush him, fighting for his family's future, fighting for respect from people who refused to give it. Kevin Nash represented everything Eddie hated about the wrestling business: the politics, the favoritism, the old boys club that protected its own and kept outsiders out. Eddie spent his whole career fighting that system, and Kevin Nash was the face of that system. Number 9, Kurt Angle, the real fight. If the conflict with Nash was political and ideological, the conflict with Kurt Angle was raw and violent. And it proves beyond any shadow of doubt that Eddie Guerrero didn't fear anyone, because in 2004, Eddie Guerrero tried to shoot on an Olympic gold medalist. Let that sink in for a moment. Kurt Angle won a gold medal in freestyle wrestling at the 1996 Olympics with a broken freaking neck. He competed in the Olympics with a broken neck and still won. He is one of the most legitimately dangerous human beings to ever enter professional wrestling. He could tie most men into pretzels without breaking a sweat. Trying to out-wrestle Kurt Angle in a real fight is tactical suicide. It's like challenging a shark to a swimming contest. Eddie knew that. He had to know that. He did it anyway. The incident happened backstage at a SmackDown taping in 2004. Both men were in the prime of their careers. Both were main event level talents carrying the blue brand on their backs. The pressure was immense. The expectations were sky high. Eddie and Kurt had just finished a match. The crowd had been sluggish. They weren't reacting the way they should have been. The timing felt off. The chemistry wasn't clicking the way it usually did. Eddie, a perfectionist who obsessed over every detail of his matches, felt that Kurt was being too stiff, hitting him too hard, not protecting him properly during certain moves, using too much force on strikes, being careless with takedowns. In the heat of the moment, while they were still in the ring finishing up the match, Eddie attempted a legitimate double-leg takedown on Angle. He shot in low, tried to grab Kurt's legs and take him to the mat for real. Not as part of the scripted match, not as a planned spot, as an actual wrestling move done with actual intent. He tried to shoot on him. Kurt later said he didn't even realize what was happening at first. He thought it was part of the match. When he realized Eddie was trying to actually wrestle him, he was furious. You don't try to shoot on a professional. You don't turn a scripted performance into a real fight. It's disrespectful to the business. It's dangerous to both performers. It questions the other person's professionalism. And when that other person is an Olympic champion who could legitimately hurt you, it's just plain stupid. When they got back to the gorilla position, the area just behind the curtain, where wrestlers wait before and after their matches, the argument turned physical. The verbal confrontation escalated. Voices got louder, fingers got pointed, and then somebody pushed somebody. Angle, feeling disrespected and violated, engaged Eddie physically. The fight was short, brutal, one-sided. Angle used his his amateur wrestling background to secure a front facelock. Some reports say it was a choke. Some say it was a guillotine. Either way, the result was the same. Eddie was neutralized almost immediately. Angle didn't need to throw punches, didn't need to slam Eddie's head into a wall. He just controlled Eddie's body with technique until Big Show ran over and physically separated them. Big Show lifted Angle off Eddie like he was pulling a child off another child during a playground scuffle. That's how the fight ended. Not because Eddie gave up, not because he tapped out or said he was sorry, but because he was outmatched and someone bigger than both of them stepped in to end it. Here's the thing that clickbait channels don't understand. If Eddie feared Kurt Angle, that fight never happens. Fear stops you from starting something. Fear makes you apologize before it gets physical. Fear makes you walk away. Eddie started it. He initiated contact in the ring with the double leg attempt. He kept the argument going backstage when he could have dropped it. He refused to back down even though he knew he would lose. That's not fear talking. That's ego. That's pride. That's the recklessness of a man who refuses to be disrespected no matter what the cost. And what happened after the fight? After the dust settled and cooler heads prevailed? Respect. Real, genuine, professional respect. Eddie approached Kurt later that same day and apologized. He said, "I know, let's just let bygones be bygones. I love you, Kurt." Not because he was forced to, not because management made him, but because Eddie understood what he had done wrong. He let his emotions get the better of him. He crossed a line that shouldn't be crossed, and Kurt accepted the apology because he understood too. He understood the pressure both of them were under, the weight of carrying a brand, the frustration when things don't go perfectly. They moved on, and then they created magic. Their match at WrestleMania 20 in March 2004 is legendary in wrestling history. One of the greatest technical wrestling matches ever performed. The finish was perfect. Eddie loosened his boot during the match. When Angle locked in his finishing move, the ankle lock, Eddie's foot slipped right out of the boot. He escaped. He rolled up Angle for the win, a perfect encapsulation of his lie, cheat, steal character. The ultimate Eddie Guerrero finish. And Angle, the consummate professional, let Eddie look like an absolute genius at his expense. He sold the finish like Eddie had just outsmarted the smartest man in wrestling. That level of storytelling only happens when both performers trust each other completely. This relationship proves something fundamental about professional wrestling that casual fans often don't understand. Friction creates greatness. The best matches often come from performers who have real tension between them, who push each other, who refuse to let each other get away with anything less than perfection. Eddie didn't fear Angle. He respected him enough to fight him when he felt disrespected. And he loved him enough to apologize afterward and create art together. That's a brotherhood forged in conflict. That's a bond that clickbait can never capture with a stupid list. Number 8, Brock Lesnar. Fear is a storyline. The idea that Eddie Guerrero feared Brock Lesnar is a perfect example of how YouTube clickbait works. It takes a scripted promo cut for a storyline and treats it like a confession, like a moment of weakness caught on camera. In early 2004, Eddie cut one of the greatest promos of his entire career. He stood in the ring on SmackDown and addressed Brock Lesnar directly. The camera zoomed in close on his face. You could see every emotion, every flicker of doubt. He said, I'm afraid I won't be able to support my family. I'm afraid of letting the people down. I'm afraid of failing." The internet heard that admission and ran with it. Eddie admitted he was scared of Brock. He said it himself. He was terrified, but they stopped listening too. Soon, they heard what they wanted to hear and ignored the rest. Eddie didn't stop at fear. He didn't leave it there. He turned it into a weapon. He pivoted the entire narrative in the span of a few seconds. He said, "But I'm also addicted. I'm addicted to the high of performing, the high of stealing the show, the high of proving everyone wrong. And at no way out, I'm going to get my high. I'm going to feed my addiction. And when I do, I'm taking that WWE championship." This wasn't a man confessing cowardice. This wasn't someone begging for mercy or looking for a way out. This was a recovering addict using Brock Lesnar as a metaphor for his demons. Lesnar became the physical manifestation of everything Eddie had to overcome. His past, his addiction, his self-doubt, his fear of failure. The promo was scripted. It was designed by Eddie and the creative team to humanize his character before a championship match, to make the audience believe the underdog had no chance, to create sympathy, to make people invest emotionally in whether Eddie could do the impossible and defeat the monster. Wrestling is storytelling. The best stories make you feel something real even though you know it's predetermined. Eddie's fear in that promo felt real because he tapped into real emotions, real struggles, but it was kayfabe, a work, part of the show, not a confession of genuine terror about facing Brock Lesnar in a scripted wrestling match where the outcome had already been decided in advance. Behind the scenes, the reality was completely different. Brock Lesnar Lesnar and Eddie Guerrero were friends, close friends, real friends. Not just locker room acquaintances who were polite to each other. They respected each other's work. They trusted each other's abilities. They enjoyed each other's company. Brock may have been the monster on screen, but backstage he was a quiet professional who took the business seriously. And he recognized greatness when he saw it. He saw it in Eddie. When you lose a match in professional wrestling, you're doing your opponent a favor. You're transferring your credibility to them. You're making them look good at your expense. The bigger the star you are, the more valuable that favor becomes. Brock Lesnar in early 2004 was the biggest star in WWE. He was young, he was strong, he was unstoppable. He had destroyed everyone put in front of him. And he agreed to lose to Eddie Guerrero, cleanly. No shenanigans, no fluke finish, no ref distraction. Eddie pinned him in the middle of the ring and won the WWE Championship. That's not something you do for someone you don't respect. That's not something you agree to if you think the other guy doesn't deserve it. Brock gave Eddie the greatest gift of his career. Vicky Guerrero, Eddie's widow, has spoken about this publicly multiple times over the years. She said that years after Eddie's death, Brock would see her at WWE events and hug her. He would tear up. He would say, "I still miss Eddie every day. I think about him all the time." Brock loved Eddie. He mourned him. He considered him a genuine friend and a mentor who taught him things about the business. There was a famous segment during their feud where Eddie brought a mariachi band to the ring to taunt Lesnar. The whole thing was ridiculous. Comedy gold. Brock allowed himself to look completely foolish. He danced awkwardly. He pretended to pass out from nerves. He let Eddie humiliate him on national television because he knew it would get Eddie over with the audience. He sacrificed his monster persona to help his friend's character. The fear Eddie expressed in that promo wasn't real. It was art. It was storytelling at the highest level. The real relationship between Eddie Guerrero and Brock Lesnar was built on respect, friendship, and professional trust. The kind of bond that allows two performers to create magic together. Number 7, Art Barr, the real pain. Art Barr was never on a fear list. He couldn't be. He was Eddie's soulmate. But you can't understand Eddie Guerrero's emotional landscape without understanding what Art Barr meant to him and what losing Art did to him. In the early 1990s, Eddie was working in Rey Mysterio in Mexico. He partnered with an American wrestler named Art Barr, who performed as the Love Machine. Together, they formed La Pareja del Terror, the pair of terror. They were the ultimate rudos, heels, villains. They used anti-American sentiment in Mexico to generate nuclear heat. They would incite near riots in arenas. Fans threw trash. Fans threatened violence. It was chaos, and it was beautiful. Art Barr taught Eddie how to be a star. Before Art, Eddie was a stoic technician. He could wrestle, but he didn't know how to engage a crowd. Art showed him how to use personality, how to be funny, how to make people hate you so much they couldn't look away. Eddie credited Art with unlocking his charisma. They became inseparable, in the ring and out of it. In 1994, they produced a 5-star classic at the When Worlds Collide pay-per-view. It was supposed to be the start of something huge. They were going to take over the wrestling world together. Art Barr died 2 months later. He was 28 years old. Eddie was shattered. He admitted to crying every day for months. Wrestling historians believe that the grief over Art's death was a major factor in Eddie's descent into substance abuse. The pain was too much. Eddie tried to drown it. The frog splash, the move that became synonymous with Eddie Guerrero, wasn't his creation. It was Art Barr's finisher. Eddie adopted it as a living tribute. Every time Eddie flew through the air, he was keeping Art alive. Every time he hit that splash, he was remembering his friend. This wasn't about fear. This was about a love so deep that its loss nearly destroyed him. Art Barr's shadow followed Eddie for the rest of his life. Number 6, Chris Benoit, the brother. Chris Benoit's story is tragic in hindsight, but in 2004, he and Eddie Guerrero shared one of the most beautiful moments in wrestling history. They were brothers, not by blood, but by choice. They came up together. They suffered together. They were both rejected by WCW's old guard. They were both called vanilla midgets. They both walked away from guaranteed money to prove Kevin Nash wrong. When Eddie left WCW in January 2000, he didn't do it alone. He did it with Chris Benoit, Dean Malenko, and Perry Saturn. They called themselves the Radicals. It was a pact, a promise. We rise together or we fall together. Eddie and Chris had a bond that went beyond wrestling. They traveled together. They trained together. They trusted each other in the ring in a way that's rare. Wrestling is a cooperative art form. You're working with your opponent, not against them. But that requires trust. You have to believe the other person will catch you, will protect you, will make you look good. Eddie and Chris had that trust. They could communicate complex sequences without speaking. A look, a nod. That's all they needed. The climax of their shared story came at WrestleMania 20, March 14th, 2004, Madison Square Garden. That night, both men won world championships. Eddie retained the WWE Championship in the opening match. Chris won the World Heavyweight Championship Championship in the main event. The closing image of the show was the two of them in the ring together, confetti falling, titles on their shoulders, embracing, crying. Two men who had been told they were too small, too boring, too vanilla, now holding the two biggest prizes in the industry at the same time. It was vindication. It was proof. It was everything they had fought for. Eddie didn't fear Chris Benoit. He loved him. He respected him. He saw him as an equal and a brother. This relationship had nothing to do with fear. It had everything to do with solidarity, with shared struggle, with the bond that forms when you fight the same battle together. Number 5, Dean Malenko, the man of 1,000 holds. Dean Malenko was the quietest member of the Radicals, but his impact on Eddie's career was enormous. Malenko was known as the man of 1,000 holds. He was a pure technician, no flash, no charisma in the traditional sense, just wrestling. Perfect, precise, beautiful wrestling. He and Eddie worked together in ECW and WCW, producing match after match that wrestling schools still study today. Their chemistry was surgical. They could communicate without words, a shift in weight, a change in grip. That's all they needed to know what came next. Malenko was Eddie's peer, his equal. When they were in the ring together, it wasn't about who was better. It was about creating art. Their matches weren't about big spots or high-flying moves. They were about storytelling through holds, through reversals, through the science of professional wrestling. Fans who appreciate technical wrestling point to Eddie versus Malenko as the gold standard. This relationship was built on mutual admiration, on respect for the craft. Dean didn't scare Eddie. He inspired him. He pushed him to be better, to be sharper, to think 3 moves ahead. When the Radicals left WCW, Dean was part of that group. He made the same leap Eddie did. He took the same risk. That kind of loyalty doesn't come from fear. It comes from trust, from friendship. Dean Malenko shares a story from WrestleMania 20. He talks about standing backstage and watching Eddie and Chris celebrate with their titles. He said he had tears in his eyes, not because he was jealous, because he was proud. Proud to have been part of their journey, proud to have helped them get there. That's the relationship. That's the truth. No fear, just brotherhood. Number 4, Rey Mysterio, the family. Rey Mysterio was Eddie's greatest opponent and his closest friend. Their rivalry is the stuff of legend. Their first major match was at Halloween Havoc 1997. It's considered the greatest cruiserweight match in WCW history. Fast, innovative, flawless. It almost didn't happen. Eddie was threatening to walk out of WCW over a contract dispute. He stayed because he didn't want to leave Rey without an opponent. That's respect. That's friendship. You don't screw over your friends even when you're mad at the company. Years later in WWE, they worked together again. This time, the stakes were even higher. They built a storyline around Rey's real-life son, Dominic. In the story, Eddie claimed to be Dominic's biological father. He threatened to take custody. He played a villain so evil, so cruel, that fans genuinely hated him. This angle only worked because of trust. Rey trusted Eddie with his son. He trusted him to keep Dominic safe. He trusted him to make the story work without crossing lines that couldn't be uncrossed. That's not a relationship built on fear. That's a relationship built on family. Behind the scenes, Eddie and Rey were inseparable. They traveled together. They ate together. They took care of each other. When Eddie died, Rey was devastated. He spent years honoring Eddie's memory, wearing Eddie's colors, using Eddie's moves. Some of Eddie's family members have criticized Rey for this. They feel he's exploiting the Guerrero name, but Rey sees it differently. He sees it as tribute, as love, as keeping his friend alive in the only way he knows how. This relationship had no room for fear, only for love. Number 3, JBL, the blood and the friendship. John Bradshaw. Layfield has a reputation. He's known as a bully, a hazing machine, a stiff worker who hurt people to prove his toughness. That reputation is earned, but when it comes to Eddie Guerrero, the story's different. JBL and Eddie were best friends. JBL was a groomsman at Eddie's wedding. They trusted each other completely, and that trust allowed them to create one of the most brutal feuds in WWE history. In 2004, JBL and Eddie worked a program for the WWE Championship. The matches were bloody, violent. At Judgment Day, Eddie bladed so deep he went into shock backstage. The canvas was stained dark red. Fans watching at home were genuinely scared for Eddie's safety. They thought he was dying, but Eddie wasn't scared. He knew what he was doing. He trusted JBL to keep him safe even as they were making it look like murder. That's the paradox of professional wrestling. The more real it looks, the more trust is required. JBL credits Eddie with his entire career. He said multiple times, "There is no JBL without Eddie Guerrero." It was Eddie who suggested the angle where JBL caused his mother to have a heart attack. Eddie knew it would generate heat. He knew it would make fans hate JBL, and he was willing to use his own family to make his friend a star. That's not fear. That's friendship. That's sacrifice. Years after Eddie's death, JBL still tears up when he talks about him. He calls Eddie the most important person in his career, the man who believed in him when no one else did. The idea that Eddie Eddie feared JBL is a misunderstanding. Fans feared for Eddie. They saw the blood and thought he was in danger. But Eddie was in control. He always was. He bled because he chose to. He trusted JBL to catch him, to protect him, to make the story work. That's the difference between real violence and professional wrestling. One comes from hate, the other comes from love. Number 2, Charlie Haas, the fight over safety. The Charlie Haas incident is minor in the grand scheme of Eddie's career, but it's worth mentioning because it illustrates something important. Eddie Guerrero didn't tolerate carelessness. During a tag team match, Eddie hyperextended his elbow. It was a legitimate injury. Eddie felt that Charlie Haas had been careless, that he hadn't protected Eddie the way he should have. So Eddie confronted him backstage. The confrontation turned physical. Charlie Haas, an accomplished amateur wrestler, took Eddie down and pinned him. The fight was over quickly. This wasn't about Eddie being scared of Haas. It was about Eddie demanding professional standards. In wrestling, your body is your livelihood. If you get injured, you can't work. If you can't work, you can't get paid. Eddie had a family to support. He had a career to protect. So when someone endangered that, he responded. Even if that someone was younger, bigger, and more skilled in a real fight. Eddie didn't care about the size difference. He cared about the principle. That's not fear. That's pride. That's the mentality of someone who refuses to be disrespected, no matter the cost. Number 1, the fear list itself, the real villain. So where did this fear list come from? If Eddie never created it, if it doesn't exist in any primary source, why does everyone believe it's real? The answer is simple. YouTube, clickbait, the algorithm. The internet has created a cottage industry of wrestling content. Channels pump out videos every single day. They need titles that get clicks. They need thumbnails that grab attention. And they've learned that certain words perform better than others. Fear is one of those words. It triggers curiosity. It implies vulnerability. It makes you want to know more. So creators take real stories and twist them. They take Eddie's conflict with Kevin Nash and call it fear. They take his fight with Kurt Angle and call it fear. They take his scripted promo about Brock Lesnar and call it fear. They aggregate names of stiff workers like Stan Hansen and JBL and imply Eddie was scared of them. Then they slap a number on it. 10 wrestlers, 5 wrestlers, 15 wrestlers. The number doesn't matter. What matters is the click, the view, the ad revenue. This kind of content doesn't just misrepresent Eddie's legacy, it insults it. Eddie Guerrero was not a man who lived in fear. He was a man who fought, who bled, who sacrificed, who defied everyone who tried to keep him down. He fought Kevin Nash's politics. He fought Kurt Angle's ego. He fought Brock Lesnar's dominance. He fought his own addiction. He fought the stereotypes that said a Mexican wrestler from El Paso could never be WWE champion. And he won, not because he avoided conflict, because he ran straight at it. The men YouTube claims Eddie feared were actually the men he loved. Chris Benoit, Dean Malenko, Rey Mysterio, Art Barr. These were his brothers, his family, his support system. They held him up when the industry tried to tear him down. The men he had real conflict with, like Nash and Angle, weren't feared. They were challenged. Eddie didn't back down. He didn't hide. He stood his ground, even when it cost him, even when it hurt. The truth is that Eddie Guerrero's career was defined by volatility, not fear, by passion, not cowardice. He was a man of extremes. He loved hard. He hated hard. He wrestled hard. He partied hard. He fell hard. And he fought hard to get back up. His autobiography is titled Cheating Death, Stealing Life. That's what he did. He stole life from death. He beat addiction. He beat the odds. He beat the system that wanted to bury him. A man who cheats death doesn't have time to fear wrestlers. So why does the fear list persist? Because it's easier to consume than the truth. The truth is complicated. It requires nuance. It requires understanding the difference between heat and fear, between kayfabe and reality, between a fight and a murder. The fear list is simple. It's digestible. It fits in a thumbnail. It gets clicks. And in the modern content economy, clicks are all that matter. Truth is secondary. But here's what the fear list gets wrong. It reduces Eddie Guerrero to a victim. It makes him small. It takes away his agency, his power, his legacy. Eddie Guerrero was not a victim. He was a fighter. He was a survivor. He was a champion. He didn't fear the men in the locker room. He earned their respect, sometimes through conflict, sometimes through blood, sometimes through tears, but always through his undeniable talent and his refusal to quit. The real Eddie Guerrero is more interesting than any clickbait title could ever capture. He was flawed. He was volatile. He made mistakes. He hurt people. He hurt himself. But he also inspired millions. He broke barriers. He proved that size doesn't matter if your heart is big enough. He showed that you can fall as low as a human being can fall and still climb back to the top. That's the legacy. That's what matters. That's what survives when the clicks fade and the views stop counting. The truth, the real story, the actual man behind the Latino Heat character. Eddie Guerrero was born into wrestling royalty. The son of Gory Guerrero, one of the greatest luchadors in Mexican history. He was supposed to be great. The pressure was enormous. The expectations impossible. And for a while, he lived up to them. He conquered Mexico. He conquered Japan. He conquered ECW. He conquered WCW despite Kevin Nash's best efforts to stop him. And finally, he conquered WWE. He became WWE champion. He main evented WrestleMania. He achieved everything a wrestler could achieve, but the cost was high. The addiction, the pain, the demons that followed him everywhere. He battled those demons every single day until November 13th, 2005, when his heart gave out in a Minneapolis hotel room. Eddie Guerrero never gave us a list of who he feared. What he left us instead was a list of who he fought for. He fought for his family, for his wife Vicky and his daughters, for his friends, for the fans who believed in him when the industry didn't, for every kid who was told they were too small, too different, too broken. He fought for the idea that redemption is possible, that you can cheat death and steal life, that you can be Latino Heat in a world that wanted you to be vanilla. The fear list is a lie, but Eddie's legacy is the truth, and the truth is always more powerful than clickbait. If you're tired of lazy wrestling myths, hit that like button. Subscribe for the truth, not the clickbait. See you in the next one.